pushing those bounds. So actually, this is the second year that we've got to do this Talk Superhero Science with Tamara Robertson here at NC Comicon. So we're very excited. Thanks for having us back. But for the panel, why do you think this discussion about science and technology is so relevant today, especially in the comics world?
I mean, I feel like it kind of always has been, at least as long as there's been a Marvel comics. So I feel like Marvel is definitely the side of, you know, the Marvel DC rivalry where science has been a thing since the beginning. I mean, Marvel Comics is founded on the Fantastic Four, which is, you know, a guy that was a scientist that took his family to space for some reason. It's a little unclear, but I feel like a lot of the Marvel superheroes that people love, that people are familiar with, you know, are scientists first. You have Fantastic Four, you have Hulk, you have Spider-Man. These are all guys who have sort of science backgrounds, and that's always been sort of a relevant thing to science and comics. They've related very closely. And I think now we're maybe in a time where science is, I want to say, under threat, under attack. Perhaps like science is not as valued as maybe it should be. And so I think, you know, seeing sort of a resurgence of people going, science really is good, is, you know, important to my future, hopefully.
Well, it's like STEM is a thing, right? It's got its own acronym and a thing. As an educator, I teach high school, I teach college. We want a smart society, and I think that's probably and this is a nice way to get it out into the community. It's user-friendly to make it, I mean, Trojan horse is how we describe it, a way to get science out there.
You know, Jeremy, it's funny that you mentioned like the dawn of Marvel Comics and the sort of incorporation of science into superheroes. But if you go back to Action Comics #1, that first page in the first Superman story is Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster going, no, this can happen. Like this, like, have you seen how much ants can carry? It's amazing. Grasshoppers can jump really high. So it's like there's always this attempt to incorporate science because that's how we understand the world, and it becomes how we understand superheroes. And so you're kind of left with these three options, where you can root what you're doing in real science, which you told me Mark Wade will pester you about that.
Yeah, that man knows about science. He has degrees.
You can do something that sounds plausible, which varies in success, or you can work within like the existing framework that people have already bought into. Because it's been 60 years since Spider-Man, and so we're all kind of like, right, radioactive Spider-Man gives you superpowers, good. We accept it, that's how it works. Gamma rays turned you into a monster. That's what those do, right?
Not just kill you.
Yeah.
For me, being an educator as well, I think it gives us a language with which to talk to students about the importance of science and technology. And then when you look at the demographics, especially looking at underrepresented minorities or women in STEM careers, we tend to lose them about the 6th grade, right? So having a language or a medium in which you can communicate with students and attract them to science and technology and engineering, I think is really important. And then also I think it encourages them to dream, right? So I assume we're all about the same, you know, generation, right? So we didn't have these when we were in college, right? So this is more powerful than the computers that I used when I was a student at North Carolina State University, you know, almost 30 years ago, right? But some young people had to come up with the ideas and concepts and the science behind this and all the other technology that we use. And so it gives them an opportunity to dream about. I remember, what's the comic where he used to talk on his watch?
Dick Tracy.
Dick Tracy. I used to love reading Dick Tracy, right? I'm like, that is really cool. But now you can actually do that. That's a thing, right? And so I think it gives people an opportunity to dream about what is and isn't possible.
Okay, so now you know why my friends are here to have this talk. So now do you want to actually know who my friends are? Because I obviously didn't have enough coffee. Will you start off?
Good afternoon, Dr. Kanton Reynolds. I'm the Director of Undergraduate Programs in the Edward P. Pitts Department of Industrial and Systems Engineering at North Carolina State University.
I'm Chris Sims, and I do not know why I'm here, because I literally just make everything up in my comics.
Just like us here.
I'm Dr. Shari Brady. I'm the co-founder of the ScienceHub.org. I'm also a high school science teacher, and I teach teacher education at NC Comicon.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Whitley. I am a comic book writer. I write a number of different things, but I think the most relevant to this story is The Unstoppable Wasp, which is how I met Tamara in the first place, because we interviewed and featured a lot of actual female scientists in this book, and then she ended up helping me do science stuff in the book. So.
I got to do the science of drifting, y'all, and as a car girl, it was amazing. And I'm Tamara Robertson. You may know me from Mythbusters or Side Genes, but my main passion is superhero science, which is why we're here all weekend doing some superhero science panels. And so, Jeremy, speaking about Unstoppable Wasps, so it has done an amazing job at elevating girls in STEM as well as being very diverse and inclusive, and we've talked a little bit about how you're touching on so many things in this new reboot that are just going to be so beautiful and mind-opening for audiences. But between last year and now, there's a bit of a hiatus, and we literally lost the Wasp, and it caused a huge stir on social media. The STEM community, especially the young STEM community, really voiced their opinions on that. Like, what was that like for you as a creator and a writer to kind of see all of that happen?
I mean, I'm used to some extent. Comics have projects that sort of come and go with popularity. It's no secret that there have been lots of comic properties over the years that have disappeared. Some for good, some come back. I mean, pretty famously, like X-Men was canceled back when Jack Kirby and Stan Lee were writing it, and it's now still one of the most well-known comics properties in the world. And I think, with Wasp, it seemed like when we were making the book that it was for an audience that we knew existed and that we knew was out there, but that they weren't necessarily the audience that might also be reading Batman or Spider-Man or anything else, that don't necessarily have a monthly pull box at their comic shop. So there's always a point where you're trying to convince whoever's doing the actual production of the comic that, like, no, this will sell eventually. You just have to be patient. And they're just watching the numbers go down and going, it's not gonna happen. But there was such a strong reaction to it, and so many people cared and showed their support by talking about it and going out and buying it, and in a lot of cases, librarians and teachers buying it for their libraries and their classrooms, and passing it on to this younger generation of readers that it's meant for, that aren't necessarily in comic shops, but care about STEM and care about superheroes and are there for this stuff. And seeing like that have such an impact that it sort of made Marvel sit up and take notice, that this thing was selling really well and they didn't have any more of it to sell. Was obviously distressing to them in a way, and they came back to us and said, would you do more? Of course, I was like, yeah, I'd love to do more. Like, I love this comic. I love all the things they can do because of it. And it's really been nice to see it sort of find its home in a larger audience.
So, and speaking of that, Dr. Reynolds, I remember that in grade school, if I brought comics to class or my Star Trek toys, I would get in trouble. But as the director for the undergraduate program, you've actually started a little mini-series where you kind of took what we did with the Science of the Justice League, and you're taking it further. What was it like, speaking of the powers that be, having to approve of things, like, how is that received by the university and by the students, and have you seen any changes based on that?
I've definitely seen some changes. I've become somewhat of a mini celebrity on campus. I was literally in Chipotle university is kind of taking it and use it as a tool to market to. I mean, we're North Carolina State University, right, where tax dollars pay for us to be there, right? And so we want to encourage students to use all of the opportunities that we have available, whether it's our engineering camps, whether it's the engineering place, which is on the third floor of our building that does K-12 outreach, right? And this is just another tool to help students understand, the principles behind scientific discovery, right? And so we're just leveraging it as an opportunity to introduce them to concepts maybe that hadn't been thought of before. And so I think the administration has been really willing to embrace it as an alternative way of trying to reach out to students, right? If you keep doing the same things, you keep getting the same results, right? So we got to try some new innovative approaches to reach students, especially when their attention span is probably a little bit shorter than ours were, in order to make them feel like science and technology is something worthy of pursuing, because otherwise we will be left behind.
Cool, but, and so education kind of really relies on that fact-based learning, but with superhero technology, it's not always cut and dry, like this is the exact science, or this is where it stems from, or this is what it is. So, Dr. Brady, as an educator, bringing superhero science into the classrooms, how do you decide what you will and won't bring, and how do you kind of connect, bridge that gap? You know, we were just talking about how when you see pseudoscience and pop culture, if someone doesn't see science other than that, they might actually lose connection with what the real science is.
Well, you know, my husband and I, Matt Brady also teaches high school, so we're kind of locked into what we can and cannot teach. So we use the superheroes as, like I said earlier, as a Trojan horse. So we put a skin over it to make it more accessible to students. We teach at a Title I school, which is, you know, high minority, high poverty demographic. They're underrepresented in STEM as it is, and so if we can get them hooked, like you said, that I think we lose them in 6th grade. So, you know, we're already behind the gun by the time they get to high school to get them interested, you know, and to keep them interested. We see it in our classrooms that, you know, our students are some of the first into the room. We never have kids late and skipping class, and you know, they want to be in our classrooms. And I think it's because we infuse this sort of, you know, skin. We don't use it all the time. We don't want to kill the fun. But, you know, when they see it, in fact, just this morning, I was teaching class and we were talking about asexual reproduction, and I have a Guardians of the Galaxy poster up in my room. And I told my students, and I said, you know, what did Rocket do at the end of the movie? I said he was gathering up all of the sticks and he was putting them, you know, in a pot. And, you know, and they're like, that's asexual reproduction. I'm like, yes, it is. And so I said, we've got groups that are, you know, the same. And so, you know, we just sort of, wherever you can grab it and stick it into what you're teaching, you know, more power to you. Use it out.
Can I add something to that? The other thing I'd like to add to that too is making it practical for the students, right? So to your point, you try to maybe grab onto something that's relevant to them with pop culture, but another way to do it is to look at what's going on in the world today, right? So one of the things we did the Black Panther talk that we talked about was how they use some of the technology, whether or not it's real. So sure, you had the kind of sonic cannons, almost like Cyclops does, right? That's a real thing, right? And so for North Carolina being a really big military state, one of the things they were able to do in order to prevent some of the piracy off the coast of Somalia was to employ these sonic cannons, right, as a non-lethal weapon to ensure that pirates wouldn't approach ships that they had no business approaching, right? And so for a student who's relative, whether it's a brother, sister, or father, that's in the Navy, right, and they use one of these weapons, it ensures that, you know, they're safe because they're not directly engaged in pirates, because at 130 decibels, you can burst your eardrums, and if you know that's where you keep your balance, and if you're on a boat, it's probably a pretty big thing to have, right? So if you can make it practical and real for a student, whether it's from a pop culture example, or something that may have some meaning to them because they have to remember that's in the service, that's another way to approach it.
Relevance is important.
Yeah.
You can apply application and relevance. Those are the two things that really sort of have to balance. This makes it easy.
It's interesting that you bring up like the military things, because it was actually, I think it was like 1957, Batman first deployed these orbs that would float out, and they would survey the landscape and send in these video images. And now, of course, we have drones everywhere. But the first application was definitely like 1975. Lockheed and NASA, they tried to start developing these surveillance drones, and now I think it's like 2001. I'm going to check my notes. Yes, 2001. And we had the first actual application in military combat with them. So, you know, there's cases like that. And so for me as an engineer, I'm often asked, like, does it bother you if the science isn't right, and I actually like that it kind of gives me something to branch towards. So like I was a huge Trekkie nerd, and I like love all of the things that we have today that literally started out of Star Trek. So if you think about the fact that they used to have their own personal access data devices. I mean, everyone's got, you know, the iPad, the Kindle, now it's like everywhere. And then like we were talking about the Dick Tracy and the watch, you know, and now you've got your Apple Watches. And even when I was going down to Puerto Rico to do relief work, I was looking at Google for the Pixel now has earbuds that you can literally live translate at any moment with someone. They're not as quick as they say they are. That takes a little bit of learning, but they're getting there, you know. So, you know, one day maybe we'll be there. But, you know, I think we were also talking about just that evolution of that technology and kind of having that hope of where we can go. And so on that line, so Chris, like you said, you like to make up a lot of things, which is why I love that you're here. And I want to know, you know, when you kind of create all of these different technologies and powers, like, do you feel that you get any criticism if it's not dead on, or do you feel like people are like, yes, you're inspiring me? And also, you mentioned in an email, Kree, Starship, Warp Cores, and Heisenberg compensators. So we would also like to learn about those.
I love fake science, and by that I don't mean like hollow earth theory. I mean like pin particles, to use an example that Jeremy has in his book. Or one of the things I really love about Marvel Comics is that there's a very nice little scientific touch. Where if someone is time traveling, you can tell if they're time traveling by detecting Von Doom radiation, which is called Von Doom radiation because in Marvel Comics, Dr. Doom invented a time machine that he used to send the Thing back in time to become Blackbeard in 1961. That's the first appearance of Dr. Doom. It's great. And I love having that structure, and I love the idea of. I'm actually really into technological histories. If anybody out there really likes Cosmos, there's a slightly less well-known British series called Connections, hosted by James Burke, that there have been 3 different series of, and it's him going through how one invention or one discovery hundreds of years ago influences this thing, it's this thing, it's this thing, and then it ends up at the atomic bomb, or at space travel, or at television. And so I love making those connections. I love the if this then this game, which is great when you're writing fiction because you don't have to actually find out. You can just make it up. You don't have to do the hard part. The hypothesis is it, and you're done. But I think that is a fun thing for me that I think people respond to. Because the better things connect and the better things interlink, the more real the fiction feels. If the fiction has its own set of scientific laws that don't contradict each other, then it feels real. And it feels more plausible. Because if you like superheroes, you're already buying into something. And you never know what's going to be one thing too far for people, one thing that clashes, one thing that's not logical. And I really like that idea in fiction because I think it mirrors scientific progress and scientific discovery in the real world, where it's all if this then this, and it's all like, well, we know it can't contradict this, so what is it? And I get to do the easy part of that, which is talk about time travel radiation and play with these ideas that we all know from fiction. We did a comic with Darkhawk, who is one of all your favorite 90s characters, or one character. Thank you. And one of the things we had in the last issue was, in order to get away from this massive space conflict, someone just blows up a spaceship. They go, oh yeah, Kree warp cores are very unstable. Well, you can modify them very easily, they're very unstable. And now that's part of the Marvel Universe. Whether or not someone ever picks up on that, but it's part of it now, that you know that Kree warp technology is bad. So there you go. Yeah.
Additions?
I mean, I think it's really interesting when people come up with pseudoscientific explanations explanations for how our pseudoscience works, like the way that thin particles work is it moves all the molecules closer together. That's it. That's the entire explanation. The molecules get moved close together, and so things get smaller.
Makes more sense than the white North Star.
Yes.
But
Yes.
I do want to say though, like trying to make the pseudoscience make sense or finding either what it evolved from or how it could actually work is also kind of, it stretches what we as scientists do. Like, so I don't know how many of you know this, but like Donald Duck back in the day did a comic where they had a cruise liner that was sunk. And so they put a bunch of inflatable balls into it to raise it back out of the water. And this same concept was then done in 20 years with a ship that was, I think, off the coast of Somalia that had sunk. And the guy tried to patent it. And of course they were like, well, there's existing tech because Donald Duck did it. And the creator of Donald Duck was like, I had no idea that would actually work, you know, and I think they tested it on the OG Mythbusters as well. But it's like, they would have never even thought of that if the creator of Donald Duck had been just like, oh, I'm just gonna make this work somehow.
Yeah, it's a Karl Marx work.
Yeah, that's impressive. I mean, and my favorite thing right now is that we're looking at 3D printing food, which again, Star Trek, Replicator, it's amazing. But like the holy grail for NASA right now is to figure out how to 3D print a pizza so that when, you know, they're on Mars missions that are longer, you know, and they can't throw all their food and everything on the ship because there's not enough room, they can start just 3D replicating food. And I'm like, that sounds amazing. And there's actually, the University of Singapore they just were able to 3D print a cocktail. But like, it's like with flavor molecules that they're making cocktails out of. So, just saying, I like the pseudoscience of it.
I like to point out that we beat Star Trek. Our communicators and our tricorders are the same device. We don't need two different devices.
You don't have to flip them open anymore either.
Yeah.
But I'm still waiting for my I need my little phaser. I've got this you know, laser beam, and there are people that can, you know, take out masses of drones with their lasers, but I do not have a phaser beam yet for Christmas. I don't know what I would face, maybe.
If you know anybody, you get Tamara to fix them.
Yeah. I think so. Okay, well, let's think about this. So as educators, though, how do you guys feel about that pseudoscience?
So we battle misconceptions all the time. So one of the biggest things now, in Avengers, they had the 1 million BC issue, that humans were not around then. But now we've got a generation that's going to be. And so as educators now, we've got to, you know, battle that on top of everything else, climate change and, you know, everything else that's flat Earth. So in a way, if the science is not a logical extrapolation, it can be harmful. I think if it is truly just sort of out there, or you're taking existing things and making them fit your story, I think, you know, Matt always says that if you have to change the science to fit your story, then you need to change your story. So, you know, the science is there, and your story's not good enough if you can't make it work around it.
But you know, if you fly around the Earth fast enough, time will go backwards.
Yeah.
We learned that from Superman.
Yeah.
I feel like that's true. I feel like you can really only get away with fake science if it's radioactive spider giving superpowers. If it's something that either we all know that, or if it's something that time travel radiation, you can make up whatever time travel stuff you want because we don't have it yet. I am really curious about where you would put the line though, because that issue of Avengers also had the Phoenix and Odin in it.
I understand your point, and I appreciate it, and I do think we have to be careful with pseudoscience, especially when we're kind of forming young minds around scientific principles. But I also think that, to some degree, pseudoscience is okay. Because to your point about the Donald Duck cartoon, that was pseudoscience in 1975, right? Nobody thought that was possible, right? Somebody had to dream it up in order for somebody to say, well, why can't we do that, right? And I think when you're dealing with the students out there, which are college students and in some cases, master's and PhD students, right? They have access to technology that they can test some of these principles out and say, well, why hasn't anybody tried this before, or have they tried it this way? And so I think it's okay in some cases. I think there's a line, to your point, that you have to be careful with, and so that you're not indoctrinating people so that they wall off themselves from this possibility. But I think pseudoscience, if it gets students interested in the whole idea of what is and isn't possible, it's probably acceptable.
Okay, so what are some examples of comics that have gotten it right? Or even got it wrong, you
I'll
know?
tell the ones that got it wrong.
Okay,
Because
we can do
there's
that.
two that always get me. There's two things that always get me. Because I think, again, you can get away with it if it's completely fake or if your audience doesn't know. But the two things that always get me are the 10% of your brain thing, which is absolutely fake, that has been like weirdly perpetuated in pop culture for 30 years. Like Deathstroke, he uses 90% of his brain. He's like 9 times better than everybody else.
You need to read the science of that.
There's that, and then there's misunderstandings of evolution, and I say that as someone who has written the X-Men. But like my favorite example of that is does anybody know Doomsday, who fought Superman? Does anybody know Doomsday's origin story? Because his origin story sounds good unless you think about it for half a second. Which is that this scientist, this Kryptonian scientist, took this thing, like sent it out in the wild until it got killed, and then he like revived it and sent it out again, and over time it got stronger. And that's not how that works. That's not how that works at all. Those are the two that always get me. Are the 10% of your brain thing and the evolution thing via Doomsday.
Yeah, going sort of in the other direction, I think it was wild to me, especially when I was in college, to hear about stuff in science and be like, man, someone's gonna write a great comic with that. And then at some point, I remember sitting. My wife used to work at the Moorhead Planetarium, and we got invited to a friend of hers party, which turned out to be a party for a bunch of like science grad students who were working on stuff that I had no idea. It's all biomedical engineering stuff. And somebody started talking about CRISPR. And I had never heard of this. And I was sort of leaning into this conversation. And they were like, yeah, it allows you to cut out pieces of DNA and glue them into another thing. And I was like, what is this comic? I know there's a comic there, and I don't know what it is, but somebody is going to do something with that, and it's going to be great. And then, yeah, like 5 years later, CRISPR started showing up in comics, and I was like, I missed it. I missed my window. But yeah, things like that always interest me, because there's like, you get that little hint of a nugget of science that like hasn't been fully explored, or is going to take decades or centuries to really figure out. And like, if you can, as a person who writes fiction, like accelerate that time and be like, okay, what is the end result of this? Vampires. Then that makes for good storytelling and fun. I think that's why Spider-Man and the Incredible Hulk worked well in a way that the Incredible Hulk might not work quite as well today. And it's like we didn't know what gamma rays did. Now we know what gamma rays do. They kill you. Bruce Banner would be dead. Not a giant monster man.
Or
Unless.
Well, I want to be able to open up to the room for questions. So anyone that has questions, what we'll do is have you, I guess, if we can line up or something. Is that easy, or is it easier just to yell it out? You guys feel like you can project? You project? You have a question? Okay, cool. So I'll let the hands build, and in the meantime, can you guys just go down and tell everyone where they can find you and follow your adventures and superhero science stuff?
Yes. Here you can find me at Artist Alley table 8013. I'll be right next to Tamara. Where I have all my books there, and then on Twitter I'm at jrome58, JROME58. And that is probably the best place to find me online, even though it's a bad place to find anything.
TheScienceOf.org is online, and you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Tomorrow, the other half my better half, Matt Brady, will be on the Science of Aquaman panel here, I think at 4 o'clock.
This room, 4 o'clock.
My table is right behind Jeremy Rosen. And you can go to my website, which is the-isb.com, and find links to everything that I do. Or you can go to your local comic store and buy Infinity War Sleepwalker right now. There's no science in it. But it does have what's inside all the Infinity Stones, which is something we made up. Also, I am also on that website as at the ISB. But don't go on that website, it's bad.
So for us, it's isc.ncsu.edu, and then most of our social media handles are NCSKATEISC.
And I'm at TLNR85 everywhere, and I'm next to Jeremy and I'm in front of Chris. And so, but you have to ask a question to get an autograph. So think of questions, not the ones you're gonna ask in here. Okay, I've got 2 little hands up here, and I'm hoping that mom can help project if they can't yell loud enough. Who wants to go first?
Ladies first, ladies first.
Ladies first. How does Rainbow Bright use her powers?
So,
Jeremy writes Rainbow Bright is the context.
yes, I write Rainbow Bright. Rainbow Bright uses her powers through harnessing the power of prisms, which contain light energy from the source of this light in Rainbow Land. So each type of crystal gives different sort of power. And Rainbow Bright is the only person who can use all of them, including white crystals, which, as everybody knows, white light is made up of all the different colors of light.
So no science in your book either.
Science.
And what's your question?
Well, in Infinity War, Thanos snaps his fingers and everybody goes to dust. Like, what's the science behind that?
What is the science behind Thanos snapping his fingers since you have this whole, like, Infinity Stone thing going on?
Thanos, of course, in that book has all 6 Infinity Stones, formerly called the Infinity Gems, and each one gives him absolute control over one aspect of the universe. So there's the Time Stone, the Reality Stone, the Power Stone. I just wrote a book about these, so I should be able to. Space Stone.
Power.
Let's see. Mind. I do it in order. The order that they appear in this. Mind, power,
Space.
space, time, reality, and soul.
Ah.
There we go. So, when he has all of those, he can control all of those aspects of the universe. So he basically has absolute control over everything. Everything that exists within reality, all, the entire time stream, like when he puts the vision back together to get that last stone, to the soul stone. So yeah, there's really not a lot of hard science there, I'm afraid. There's good comics, and there's good movies.
Just hard rocks.
And it does show that as a scientist, you write everything down, so he would have had a cheat sheet if he had been a scientist. So just go ahead. You.
Yeah.
Spider-Man. Cool.
What's your favorite superhero science that's really fake?
Your favorite superhero science that's really fake,
Real or fake?
real or fake from.
Any comic.
I mean, I'm gonna go with Pym particles and her lab. Like, I want to be able to shrink down and go into a lab and just be able to work for like ever in time, have no effect on it. Like, I feel like I would be so much more efficient. Though maybe I wouldn't be efficient because I wouldn't need to be efficient because I would just have all the time in the world.
You established that only working and closing only working and closing yourself off all the time is a bad thing. I like the miniature lab. That was a lot of fun. What's my favorite bit of my favorite bit of pseudo-comic science is one that I am actually working on right now. So it's almost like a spoiler, but one of the scientists in Unstoppable Wasp studies trees and is studying specifically the acacia tree, which the neat thing about the acacia tree is that acacia trees can, through smell, send messages to each other. And I learned about this I was reading up on a story about these acacia trees that basically when a group of animals is eating one tree too much, it will turn itself poisonous. It will start generating a toxin in its leaves, which will kill animals. And it also sends out a signal to these other trees that they should do the same thing too, so that the animals will leave. Unfortunately, when you have them in a wild animal park, the animals cannot leave. So suddenly, 300 wildebeest die with no explanation. And in a closed room mystery, like they had just 300 wildebeest on this wild animal park that just died. There were no predators, nothing. They were just poisoned overnight. And they all died because all these trees conspired to kill the wildebeest.
So are you wanting to kill wildebeest? Is that what we're learning right now?
That's not just a huge downer, though.
I think it's incredible that this group of plants conspired to kill an entire herd of animals.
You know I got the anxiety, right?
You don't eat acacia trees.
We have like 5 minutes left, so, and we can go out and take more questions after this as well. Go ahead.
So I have a question about from Ant-Man and Ant-Man Swap series. As I've been able to make Ant-Man less powerful is because when you got strings, they have the same power delivered as an adult man in that case. Then how can he able to move the building when you shrink it down? Because the mass will be the same. So he had his head. I'm able to move that building when you can shrink it down.
Mass creation.
Yeah, you're right.
That's good.
Because the entire basis on which Ant-Man and the Wasp's powers work is they have just as much strength and mass at whatever size they are, because again, the particles move close together. They're just as strong.
And when he's a giant man, he should be very weak.
Yeah, when he's a giant man, he should maybe have trouble standing up. You're right. It's dumb. It doesn't work. But it looks cool.
I like that fun fact, but I think we should be able to get one more and then hear from
If given the opportunity, Spider-Man and the Hulk were mentioned a lot, and it's obvious, gamma radiation gets you, you're dead. How would you, if you could, reboot the Hulk to make it make sense with science today?
I wouldn't, but there's actually a Warren Ellis comic, one of the Warren Ellis Marvel comics. It actually might be in Planetary, but it's a Hulk analog, where the reason Bruce Banner doesn't die when the bomb goes off is that he mentally does an equation that allows him to turn into a monster instead of dying. So the radiation is only incidental. So I would do that. I would just replace it with something else that doesn't make sense.
They retconned it years later to make it where he was had mutant genes inside him.
Yeah, sure. It's meditating like Firestorm.
Same thing they did this before, that's why they didn't die. They retconned years later when they got the new knowledge that wasn't probably possible, to where they were secretly mutants that would have been activated by anything like that to hit them.
There you go.
Awesome. Well,
Mutants fix a lot of,
Use a big enough term, almost anything is possible. Like cosmic rays. It's cosmic power that did this thing.
so as you can see, we love superheroes and we love science. So we're all going to be around Con this whole weekend. Feel free to come by and visit us. We'll be outside for a little bit, but I think we have to go up the room. So thank you all, and thank you, my amazing friends, for joining us on this panel today and for the great questions.